waiting for Reverend Aaron Long to arrive. We'll be talking about Francis Turretin and sola scriptura. And here he comes now.
Sorry about that, Donald.
That's okay. Good to see you again, Aaron.
Are you feeling rested up?
Yeah, I took 2.5, 3 weeks off. Very much so.
You need it.
Yeah, I was up in Detroit for a funeral of one of Dad's elders and then stayed up there because I got family there. So it was good, but it is a long trip. I started at 5 in the morning from Detroit, got into here, long drive at 7 p.m. at night. So that itself took a couple days to recover from. So anyways, here we are. Anything
Well,
new?
I have a question and an update.
Okay, good.
Thomas Yuetter, I don't know if you know him.
Yes.
He has put me in connection with the PRNCA, Hoskimus denomination.
A Hoaxima's denomination?
Denomination.
I got you.
So I'm in conversations with them right now for intercommunion and such like that also.
Yeah, they're a pretty doctrinally strong group.
But it's sort of interesting because I didn't go looking for it. Yuetter just messaged me and just said, would you like to talk? Because he evidently knows a lot of it.
Yeah, he's up in that area. He's pretty knowledgeable. I think he's a layman, but I don't know.
Well, I've met him at UECNA meetings before.
Oh, okay.
Because see, he's technically a member of the UECNA, but I think if he could, he'd rather be with us than the UECNA because he's not real comfortable with some of the Anglo-Catholic remnants. And I'm not talking about you and Peter's discussion. I'm talking about the ones that are actually not really Protestant, if that makes any sense.
No idea who or what they are.
Well, it's the Steve Morrell and that whole crowd. The question I had, all right, I've gotten back into G.I. Williamson. You see, I've used Williamson's commentary on the Heidelberg Catechism, his commentary on the Westminster Confession of Faith, and his commentary on the Westminster Shorter before.
Okay.
But I've just used them as books to aid in teaching. What is the story with Williamson? Do you know anything about him?
I do not. I have not read his commentary on the Westminster Standards for years and years, decades, maybe 40 years ago. So I can't tell you. I suppose maybe a Google search might help.
Well, I'll say this, and I hope he isn't listening and taking offense. His commentary on the Westminster Confession, it isn't bad, it's not wrong, but it's not setting anything on fire, if that makes any sense.
It does, and that's what struck me at the time when I read it.
But his commentary on the Heidelberg is spectacular.
Oh.
But I think his best one is his commentary on the Westminster Shorter.
Okay.
Now, while you know I'm a Thomas Watson guy, and I'm always going to stand up for Body of Divinity over anything else as a commentary on the Shorter.
Yeah.
Williamson's commentary on the Westminster Shorter is the most accessible commentary on the Westminster Shorter for a modern age that I have ever come across. Because he has the one lesson that stands out, and I can't remember which question is, you're the one that memorized the Westminster Shorter, but the question on the Bible, Williamson actually goes through and he defines neo-orthodoxy, Bardianism.
Oh, wow.
He defines liberalism, and he defines traditional reading. And he actually has pictures. Like, He does all the little stick figure pictures to show you a visible representation of the differences between the way they view the Bible and inspiration. And I've got to say, it has been one of the more useful tools I have had to discuss scripture with lay people to explain these things ever. I mean, I'm so impressed. Williamson's work on the Westminster Shorter actually makes it even more useful for the laity, if that makes any sense.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, I can't offer any comment on it.
And I mean, I don't mean it to be an insult. There's nothing wrong with this commentary on the Westminster Confession. It's just not setting anything on fire. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not bad, but it's not spectacular either.
I'm
But his work
working
on the catechisms is great.
working through A. Hodge on the Westminster Confession, and it's basic, but it's illuminating as well. Not a barn burner, but it's helpful.
I didn't know Hodge did a commentary. AA did a commentary on the Westminster.
Yeah, he did. He did. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I'm just glad we're back on and we can go with this. I'm going to have to take off at 11. I got a chiropractor appointment this morning, but
Okay. I just wanted to throw out there that I have confidential informant who tells me that Fenwick is under criminal investigation for theft of £200,000, which would be about $300,000. And there's 4 agencies that have gone after him. A bank who notified the police department. That's the second. And then the third is a Charities Commission that regulates trust deeds for churches. And then fourth, there's an independent forensic audit of the last 20 years under Fenwick. All 4 of those streams started in May, and they're all just getting off the ground now. So my confidential informant tells me that it could result in life imprisonment for Bishop John Fenwick. So I won't say more than that, but it would be the end of a career appropriate to that sociopath, and to see him spend his remaining years at age 75 in life in prison would be a shattering experience for him, his wife, and his daughter or two. So just an update.
well, what do you think? And I'm just going to throw this out there. What do you think Sutton's game is right now that he knows he's on his way out? Because he seems to be going around and doing a final tour of everything and setting something in place.
I don't follow him much. I don't have people who talk to me from those circles anymore. I only work at Twist House. I'm not in Prayer Book Anglican or any of those. That wouldn't surprise me. He took Calvin Robinson under his wing and 36 hours later dumped him aft of the stern into the wake.
Oh, I'm going to tell you the story about that. I actually know another piece of that.
Oh,
Sutton didn't want to throw him in. I got to have a certain degree of respect for Sutton on this. Sutton had his feet held to the fire because when the REC signed the agreement with the ACNA, there were some clauses that some of the more snakish TEC guys placed in there that if basically the House of Bishops says that a clergyman has to go, they have to go. Otherwise, the diocese or like the REC would be considered to be in violation of their agreement, and there would be the repercussions of that. So basically, they told Sutton if he didn't, they were going to remove the REC from the ACNA.
Oh, is that solid reporting?
That's some back channel stuff I got.
But it's solid, you believe?
I believe it's pretty solid. I trust my sources, and I heard it from more than one source.
Okay. All right.
But
Yep.
Sutton was mad, which is actually why I asked the question I asked, because as I watch him float around, it's almost like he is setting bombs on his way out because he's mad at the ACNA right now.
Well, he's a sociopath too, in my view. And he's always had the impulse to power and impulse to autocracy. And so if he was shut down, that would offend him. That's his persona.
Well, I've told you my problem, and it's why I have blown up at David Veitch so hard. It's why I've blown up at everybody about this so badly. Is literally, I have now listened through Robinson's speech that got him in trouble with the ACNA. And the two offensive things, one of which isn't offensive at all to me, that he said was that women's ordination has neither biblical nor historical validity. Therefore, a church that practices women's ordination is invalid. And the other was John Calvin's burning in hell. And the thing is instead of going after him for what he said about John Calvin, they're offended by what he said about women's ordination.
Ah, gotcha.
Which shows me where the rotten fruit is.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't wrong on women's ordination. He may come at it from a different angle than I would, but he was dead on with what he said in the speech. Where he's wrong is saying John Calvin is burning in hell. And what is driving me completely insane is all these supposedly Protestants are mad at him about making the comment about women's ordination and are not saying a single word about what he said about John Calvin. David Veitch is not said a word about Robinson's comments about Calvin. None of them have. And it's like, you claim to be Protestant. This guy basically blasphemes a Protestant pope, for lack of a better term. And you're mad about what he was right about. I don't understand it.
I don't either. I've often said, take away their robes and their hats and they'll scream. Take away Reformed theology and they'll go silent. They're sort of all over the map theologically. That's my problem with ACNA. They are not homogeneous. They're not Reformed.
Well, I'm going to tell you, Donald, it has become my problem with Anglicanism overall. Because
you know my views on that. I will not go near any American Anglican group.
Well, from what I have seen, Anglicanism in its modern iteration for about 90% is theologically bankrupt no matter what. As I say that, what I'm talking about, all right, not Murphy, the guy in New Zealand. What is his name? You would know who I was talking about. River Devereux.
Devereux. Okay, yeah.
Devereux got into it with me, and and there was something I was smelling in the water, because Devereux claims to be a Reformed Anglican. He claims to subscribe to the formularies. He claims to subscribe to Reformed theology, but something he was saying wasn't sounding right. And I kept pushing him and pushing him and pushing him. And it turns out he's an annihilationist.
Well,
And then we went through this whole thing where he was trying to defend that Cranmer's 42 articles were cut down to the 39 articles so that views like annihilationism would be allowed. And then he starts listing off these obscure Anglican bishops that in England that evidently during the 17th century taught annihilationism. Even and I asked Peter about it one day in conversation because Peter knows more of those obscure people than I will ever know. And Peter said it comes down to two things. He said there has been this running stream in Anglicanism ever since the Puritans left, where Anglicanism as a whole, after William Beveridge, pretty much abandoned systematic theology. Beveridge would have been the last true Anglican that would have held any semblance of systematics, with Beveridge's commentary on the 39 articles and his commentary on the prayer book. And he said the other problem is Anglicanism has a historical bent to elevate biblical theology and unity over Christian truth. And he said, as a lifelong Anglican, it hurt him to say it, but he said in the circles that he's been in, and he's been in several and all different levels of this, he was Church of England, he was Free Church of England, he's been ACC, he's UECNA now, but he said that what he has seen is they value unity more than biblical truth.
well, I heard the APA Archbishop Chandler Jones at an Anglican conference at Beeson Divinity School in Birmingham, Alabama, 4 or 5 years ago. And he was sponsored by Shifty.
Mm-hmm.
Shifty sat right in front of me. I was on the Southern Apps, arrived early, sat up close, and the Apps was near the stage. And all of a sudden, all these UECNA bishops, including Foley Beach, including some of the speakers, Gerald Bray. I'll never forget Gerald Bray sitting in the apse laughing at one of the speakers. And Gerald Bray has more knowledge in his pinky finger than all of those bishops put together, teaching Anglican history for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And Shifty Sutton sat right in front of me and did not recognize me. But Shifty sponsored Chandler Jones, APA Archbishop.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget Chandler Jones telling the audience that Anglicanism was a via media between Rome and Constantinople.
What?
And I nearly fell off my chair when I heard that. And I remember going, and Shifty didn't say a thing. It was kind of like Chandler Jones spoke, and then Shifty got up and kind of monitored some of the questions and answers
Mm-hmm.
from people who lined up in the central aisle to ask questions. I remember afterwards talking to Gerald Bray up at the front, and I asked him what he thought of Chandler Jones' remark. And he looked over at Chandler Jones to his left and to my right and said, yeah, I don't know what hole they pulled that guy out of. So he didn't think much of Chandler Jones either. So there was no real systematic theology that went on. I know Chandler got a MDiv at Duke University.
Yeah, and that's about worth the toilet paper it's made out of,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's about as leftist as they come, and they don't teach you even how to be a pastor.
yeah. Anyways,
Well, and this leads into, and I know we're getting back into it, but I keep digging. And you know me, I get a hold of the bone and I'm going to run it until it's down to the marrow.
we're both alike with that.
I am incredibly comfortable with the ARP and its stances. I'm comfortable with the PR, the Huskamas group. I'm comfortable with the RCUS. I'm comfortable interacting with Eldonia, one of the Lutheran breakaways that is confessional. But I am really, really bothered by the weakening I see in people's confessional stances in supposedly confessional groups. I'm dealing with a case in the OPC, and I don't want to go any farther than saying it's in the OPC. I don't want to go into where it's at because it's still a case in process where I've been asked to basically be a defense attorney for a pastor that is being persecuted to a degree. And he's being persecuted because he has spoken out vehemently against taking exceptions. Why is it that you think that the confessional backbone is weakening around us? Do you think it is because of culture? Do you think it is because of the seminaries? Do you think it is because of the congregations? I mean, I've seen it in the OPC, I've seen it in the PCA, I've seen it in the Missouri Synod, I've seen it in Wales, I've seen it in the URCNA. All of these that used to be bulwarks for confessional Christianity, I'm starting to see cracks in the system, if that makes any sense.
It does. And I don't know why. I was thinking about justification by faith alone this morning, working with James Buchanan. And it came to me once again, and I prayed about it, as to where that doctrine has gone. It's weak. It's not central as it was to the reformers.
Well, I think it's, hold on, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think it's funny you brought that up because, all right, I don't know if you were paying any attention, but you know, I put a question up in the 4 groups that I really interact with on a regular basis every morning.
Yeah.
A couple of days ago, which is Historic and Biblical Christianity, Prayer Book Anglican, Low Church Anglican, and Twist House. The question I put up, I think it was 2 days ago, maybe 3 days ago, was what are your thoughts on Christus Victor? Soteriology. You would not believe that. You would not believe some of the responses I got in the other groups. Basically, to sum it all up, I got several responses across the other 3 groups. Historical Biblical Christianity is a confessionally, well, all the admins have to adhere to one of the Reformed confessions. So, I mean, it's not Anglican, it's Reformed for the most part. But I had responses in the other 3 groups from members of the groups that said Christus Victor was the appropriate soteriology. And I'm thinking, not if you hold the confessions, not even if you hold the Lutheran confessions, can that be the appropriate soteriology. Penal substitutionary atonement is what all the Reformed and the Lutheran confessions teach.
Yeah.
And it's almost like these supposedly confessional churches are letting this stuff slide. The annihilationism question.
Yeah.
This is not acceptable.
Yeah. I would see Christus Victor, I see it as like a diamond. That's one aspect.
Yes,
But
it's true, but it's not.
it's not it. It's, yes, penal substitutionary death. And I was looking at some of my notes this morning on Leviticus with the Day of Atonement and the putting of the hands onto
The scapegoat.
And carrying sin off. And so I was looking at some of the atonement issues this morning, and there's I would say, an embarrassing amount of riches in favor of penal vicarious substitutionary atonement. Embarrassing amount of evidence for it. Undeniable. And in fact, I was going to send my friend in Detroit and also my pastor, ARP pastor, a set of 8 or 10 questions that were in a circular letter about 1070 AD by Anselm of Canterbury.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he was French. After the Norman invasion, he'd been an abbot at a monk abbot in Cluny, I believe, which would suggest that what he said in the circular letter of 1070 to all of his clergy, which in Canterbury would be what, 4,000 or 5,000 churches, and it's what you were to say and ask of a dying man.
Mm-hmm.
And the clergy were to ask these 8 or 10 questions that were emphatically about penal substitutionary death of Christ.
Can you email me that when you send it out?
I can do that. And it's decisive. And you rely on your own works. No, I only Christ. What if the devil rises up and accuses? No, only but Christ. What if God himself gets up and says, you're a sinner, wicked, deserve hell? I only can plead Jesus Christ and his merits and works. And it's justification by faith alone, exquisitely in 1070. So my point that I want to track down further is how far wide was this doctrine, because it must have been in France, and I believe he came from Italy originally.
Mm-hmm.
How far and how wide was this the view of the church? And I don't know of any other writings that explore that issue.
Well, me and my wife in our home devotions have been reading through Elijah and Elisha lately. And I guess different time period, different seasons of your life, you can read the same story and get something different out of it.
Yeah.
What has really struck me this time is it was really Elijah and Elisha against the world. Because it didn't matter that God continued to work through the two of them, that God showed his presence with the two of them. The world of the nation of Israel was constantly against them no matter what. I'm afraid, Donald, that we are the Elijahs and the Elishas of our time period. That the world here isn't just the world as in its bigger sense, but it's the greater church.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
God has raised up people like us to continue to be the Elijahs and the Elishas.
Yep.
But we will constantly be persecuted by our supposedly fellow brethren because they love their false doctrine more than they love the Lord.
I hear you. And
But
yet there's 7,000 who've
that
not
have not bent the knee.
to bail. And that's why I love my little local church here. The pastor is so good.
But the other part that has come to me from that is the school of the prophets. In the midst of the persecution and in the midst of the trials and tribulations, Elijah still creates the school of prophets to raise up a generation to combat the evil of the Baals. And what can we do to create something that can fight these Baals going forward? Because even though I'm only 49, Donald, my better years are behind me at this point. Shouldn't say I am either at the middle of my career or on the downhill slide. It may just be the beginning of it, but
Oh, you've got a good 20, 25 years left.
Right, but it's odd to be 2025 looking at only having 20. In my mind, I'm still a 27-year-old getting out of seminary and fighting. And it's there we have to create something to carry forward after we're gone. Because this is not getting any better unless the Lord comes back, or unless he actively raises up more people. But I've always been a firm opinion. I've always held the firm opinion of what Mama Long always said. She said, trust in the Lord, but he don't tell you to lean on a shovel and pray for a hole.
That's a good saying.
I don't know.
It's a big question you throw out there. I don't have an answer. I've lived long enough to see the resurgence of Reformed theology in the last 50 years. And the exquisite decline of the main line into the sideline. And that's continuing to this day.
And it will. They're a non-entity at this point.
Yeah, they have no vigor, no life. They sing the old classical hymns, which kind of constrains them theologically, but the pulpits and the pastors are not vigorous. Now, there's exceptions to that. And one of them was St. Mary's Episcopal, where I was at for several years, where they were hanging on to the classics, despite the liberalism of the bigger church. It's bigger. Now it's whatever it is now. It's gone down. But we've lived to see that in the seminaries. It goes back to Machen in 1930. In fact, I'm going to reread Machen's Christianity and Liberalism again.
Mm-hmm.
Been a long time. And if Machen is known for anything, it's his clarity and economy of words. His New Testament introduction is small and short, but it's concise and compacted. So I'll be going back through that as a review of what he was facing in the early 20th century. And I'm thinking of the Auburn Affirmation of 1925 that had the majority of signatures from teaching and ruling elders against the major doctrines, like virgin birth was one of the things that could be denied. And Machen did write a very big and scholarly work on the virgin birth. Um, so we'll see what that turns up, but he lived to see the decline of his own denomination theologically. And then I lived to see Jim Boyce and R.C. Sproul gather together that 10-year conference on the International Council on Biblical Inerrancy. And I remember when that started at 10th Presbyterian in 1978. And they produced papers and conferences every year for 10 years and protected and defended the doctrine of Scripture as only Jim Boyce, R.C. Sproul could do. So we've had that witness. In fact, I would hope and pray that denominations would embrace that and put it in the confessional standards alongside the Reformed confessions. You know, my meme where you got a baby with 0 Reformed confessions, and then you got a strong, muscular man with the 15 Reformed confessions. But I think you could put the International Council on Biblical Inerrancy right alongside the Reformed standards. There's no doubt whatsoever in the history of the church that sola scriptura has been the majority view, even down to Thomas Aquinas.
I agree.
You know,
And Aquinas, I think, would have defended sola scriptura.
yeah, he got some things wrong, but he got that right. He got predestination right.
It's why that by the time the Jesuits take over after Trent, they have to basically dance around Aquinas because Aquinas is speaking against them.
Yeah.
But no, Donald, and I'm sorry I've sort of led us down this path today, but this is really something that bothers me. I have sat through as an outsider. Right now, I'm on my 4th case in 4 years as a theologian or a defender, any of those different positions. And it's been in supposedly confessional churches. And consistently, I see the leadership siding against the people who are trying to honestly hold the confessions. And it's this whole, I don't know, it's almost like existentialism has crept in, relativism, subjectivism has crept in, even in confessional circles, to where they view the primary doctrine of the gospel as being superior to everything else that might be taught. And to try to enforce anything above and beyond the gospel is something that is required, is considered anathema. Now, they do it with bigger words and in fancier ways than the Baptists do, but they're doing the same thing.
I wish I could help you because my orbit is extremely small. I'm in an Associate Reformed Presbyterian church, and I'm in Twist House. I'm not in other groups. So I can't comment, and I'm so far removed from the seminary life that I can't really comment.
Well, it's not, I guess I'm coming to you as an elder, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I don't want to say I'm losing hope, because I see the ARP is still out there fighting. I see the RCUS is still out there fighting. It's like I said, on the Lutheran side, I see Eldonia still out there fighting. But what I see is this great wave. I don't know if existentialism is the right word. The thing is it's cloaked in contemporary worship. It's cloaked in relativism to the culture. But what it actually is subjectivism that's just been wrapped up in individualism, wrapped up in a different shell. crashing on the last bastions that I've seen historically. Like the PCA pastor that I was called into in South Dakota that said he could consecrate the elements for Holy Communion in 47 seconds. I can't even get through the words of institution in 47 seconds. And I know for a fact that unless the words of institution, if you do not have the bread and the wine and the words of institution, you do not have a valid communion. Or in the other PCA instance where there were guys trying to take exception to infant baptism
As elders?
as teaching elders.
No way.
Yeah.
And was it allowed by the presbytery?
It would have been had I not thrown an ever-loving fit and pointed out to them. I don't even subscribe to the Westminster Standards, and I can tell you that this is a complete invalidation of the Westminster Standards.
Yeah. There goes covenant
The
theology.
theology. That was my exact words. If you throw out infant baptism, you throw out covenant theology, you throw out covenant theology.
Why doesn't a teaching elder, PCA, be an honest man with integrity and pull his credentials and go with
One of these two guys that were trying to do that, Donald, to make it even more fun for you, was at the time of the trial a recent graduate from your alma mater,
which one?
Westminster East.
Did they shut him down?
Oh no, they gave him full voice. He was accepted. But I basically pushed the issue to where unless they've slipped in somewhere else, they had to get rid of it because, I made the covenant theology argument that basically this is not something that can be an exception because it does intrinsic damage to the entirety of the standards. It's not like, all right, I'll give you, the argument I made is if you want to take an exception to the second commandment issue with images, I get where there's an argument back and forth. I get where people can have strong opinions, but it does not damage the rest of the confessions. It's something that is there. Once you get rid of infant baptism, it starts to cut into covenant theology. And once it starts to cut into covenant theology, it basically starts to fragment the rest of the confession and the catechisms. And it's not me defending images, it's me saying that in taking an exception there, you're not hurting everything else.
Yeah, R.C. Sproul kind of waffled on that point of the second commandment.
Well, it's
images.
And it's not me saying they're wrong.
He took some heat for that, by the way. He had in the narthex, still has in the narthex, paintings of Christ, cross, and a few other scenes. And there was a little bit of a micro battle that went on, but it didn't, that was it.
But it doesn't do intrinsic damage to the confessions. Cutting out infant baptism hurts other issues, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It's not just affecting that one thing.
I can't even think in a Baptist way. I'm so.
But Donald, this is what's coming through. I could make the same argument. I was not involved in this directly, but with the revoice coming out of covenant.
Oh, my word.
But they didn't just immediately shut it down.
Yeah.
They allowed it to go on without disciplining the churches, the seminary, and the elders.
Did they discipline all of those sources?
Churches? No, they did not. Or with the OPC, and this I was involved with, when Michael Spangler, back in 2020, wrote his argument against Amy Bird's The Yellow Wallpaper, which was Amy Bird's defense of women's ordination, Spangler came out against her, and the OPC allowed their teaching elders to basically jump Spangler. Spangler got disciplined and kicked out of the denomination,
Yeah.
even though he was right. Now, he has gone a little bit wonky now, and I can't defend him because he's fallen into some Kenneth circles. But I blame the OPC for him falling into Kenneth circles, because if they would have listened to him and supported him, they'd have been there to help correct him when he really was getting into trouble.
What did they discipline him over? Was it his method and mode and tone?
It was his method and mode.
Method and what?
It was how he said it, not what he said.
Okay. That's where, yeah. So they didn't really comment on his theological doctrine, but on his style.
And they never once punished Amy Bird for defending women's ordination.
That's weird.
And that's the OPC, Donald. That's not like it's a mainline group. That's Machen's baby.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, I got to let you go. We'll get back on the scriptura Friday.
Okay.
I just like talking to you, Donald.
Likewise. Good to see you again.
All right.
And anything good going on in the other 3 Facebook groups?
The Africans have sort of surprised me. There's still a lot of garbage floating around, but I'm discovering, and we've discovered, I think I told you this before with the E&R project, we have discovered that evidently we had missionaries out in Gambia, and I can't remember the other place. I ended up laying hands on JT to make him a bishop because he's going to Africa this fall. We had missionaries as the RCUS and the ENR out there in Africa that the UCC basically just cut them off. And there are these classes out there that are strict Heidelbergers that have been floating around in Africa for 70 years with no connection.
Whoa.
They saw our symbol on Facebook and they sort of migrated to these groups. These guys, for not having any outside contact, are relatively theologically solid.
Whoa.
The only help they're asking us for are resources to fight the prosperity gospel.
Okay. All right.
But I'll leave you alone. We'll talk on Friday, Donald.
Sounds good. See you later, Aaron.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.